Okay. Well, thank you everyone for being here today. We received a lot of inquiries and questions about what the process would be for the officers, the 6 officers from the Oklahoma City Police Department when it was announced last Friday by District Attorney Bahena that they would not be pursuing charges on those. And so I thought it would be good just to bring everybody together and kind of talk about our process that we have for officers that return to duty. And even though this particular both of these officer-involved shootings involve charges being filed and the officers being off for a lengthy amount of time, our processes still hold true in how we bring officers back to work. And so first of all, what I'll say is a lot of the timing and what goes on as far as bringing them back to work will be based on them. We're obviously not going to push that. They've been through a traumatic experience, and it's been traumatic for everyone, the community, the officers involved, and definitely the families of Benny Edwards and Stavion Rodriguez. And so I feel like how we bring those officers back too has an effect on the families and the community, and they want to see how we're doing that and be transparent about that. And so that's our plan, is that we will follow our return to duty protocol, which involves a lengthy process of the wellness program. They'll be visiting with a licensed professional counselor and others to make sure that they are in fact ready to come back to work. And then that process too will include a debriefing and a review of everything that we do as an organization. We couldn't really talk to the officers while they were under a criminal indictment. So now that we can do a full review of that, which is what we do in every critical incident, officer-involved shooting. Before we bring our officers back, we do a training debriefing to make sure that there's not anything there that we could improve on. And I think it's very important for the community and for everyone to know that we've not sat still during this 2.5 years. We've made a lot of changes in our organization. I talked about those in the statement I released on Friday. We created a reality-based training unit, which every officer on the department has now been through that training to learn better de-escalation and just better tactics in how we deal with armed individuals and individuals that are unarmed too. And then also how we've deployed more or less lethal in the field. And one of the things that I think is very important in that too is, used to what we would do is you would assign a less lethal device to an officer and train that officer and then put that out into the field. And then once we did that, then only that person would be allowed to use that weaponry. So with that less lethal now, we have more certified operators than we have actual devices. So if an officer was to go on some kind of extended leave, have an illness, something like that, we now have another person that can pick up and have that less lethal device in the field as well. So that's just a few things. I'm sure there's questions that you may have that I'll be happy to answer, and you know, just anything I can do to help talk about the process a little bit.
Officers who are returning back to duty, will they return back to their original positions on the department, or will they have new jobs?
That's a good question. We're going to leave a lot of that up to them. Definitely not going to rush them back into that. So, you know, it's not going to be a process where, you know, they're going to show back up and just go right back to work. They have 2.5 years worth of training to go through. It's going to take a while to catch up on that. But I just don't know how to answer that, because we've never had a situation like this. I can imagine several scenarios where they don't go back to where they were. I can imagine some where maybe they do, but all of that's going to depend on our wellness team, those individual officers, and you know, what we feel is best for the community too.
Have you reached out to any of the victims' families or any community activists prior to Friday's announcement?
I did not. I reached out to some community folks that I knew prior to the announcement, but I left what was going to happen to DA Bahena, and to be honest, I didn't know Friday morning how things were going to go until the DA's office met with us at 11 o'clock. So I did reach out to activists. I did not reach out to families. DA Bahena was doing that. And I left most of Friday's events to her, because it's her decision, her office, and they're the ones that were, you know, that were coordinating all that, not us.
Why did you reach out to activists, or what did you say?
Well, obviously I'm going to leave those conversations between us, but I always feel it's good to reach out in the community to those people that we respect, we have relationships with, and we know that they carry weight and have a voice in the community. Every major city agency does that. We reach out to make sure if they have concerns, let us know so that we can help address those and we can work those out.
Are you concerned about them returning, if they do return to the streets, patrol, or whatever position they had? Just based on the history of what, I don't know if the public would even know who they are if they saw them, but is that a concern?
I think it has to be a concern, to be honest. But we have to do what's right, and we have to do what's best not only for those individuals but the community and our organization as well. And so, again, I couldn't predict to you or tell you where those officers will end up, because it's largely going to depend on wellness and the things that we're working together towards that return to duty protocol, and how long that takes too. I don't have an answer to that as well.
Do you agree that the shootings were justified?
It doesn't matter whether I agree or not. Ultimately, what we do as a police department when we investigate a shooting is we gather the evidence and we present that to the district attorney's office. We never offer an opinion. We're not allowed to, and we shouldn't be. We just present the facts of the case to the district attorney's office, and the district attorney has the final say in whether or not the shootings are justified.
What's your message to the victims' families?
I think just like I said on Friday, I mean, there's nothing I can say that's going to ease their pain. This definitely does not ease their pain. I think too, there's been a lot of pain for the officers that have gone through this as well, and their families, and there's nothing you can say or do that's going to erase any of that. I think the biggest thing is that what we try to do as an organization, and what I would say is look at what we've done and how we've changed as a department since then. I think it's important that those families know that we looked at these instances and said, or at both of these shootings, and said, there are some things that we can do better, and we did do better at. And I think that's about the best thing that I could possibly say.
Do the officers for sure want to come back to work, or is it still kind of up in the air?
I don't know. I have a meeting planned with them, and we'll be talking to them about that and what their future holds. So I don't know. I don't know if all of them will come back to work or not.
So you said this was the longest amount of time that had gone from a shooting to a decision by the DA's office. What did they do in that time? And they were on paid administrative leave during that, all of them?
Yes, they were on paid administrative leave. We couldn't have them working. So, as far as what they did, they just weren't allowed to come to work. I mean, they were on paid administrative leave.
And you said that was the longest, I don't know, in the department's history or just that you know of, as far as 3 years is a long time.
Well, what I meant too by that in uncharted territory is we've never had a group of officers like that charged, and the process itself, all of that, it was all new to us. We've had an officer charged before in a shooting, but that process was very different. That shooting circumstance was very different too. So this was just, it was just very different for us. So we were kind of learning as we went.
Are you all taking any advice from the use of force expert that DA Bahena had hired?
I've not spoken to that expert. Matter of fact, I didn't know who that was until that was brought up there. So I have not spoken to that individual at all.
Chief, a couple of questions. Of course, you can't reveal personnel issues, but policy-wise, can you talk a little bit about the department's policy of doing psychological evaluations after a shooting to make sure the officer, has support and care and is being monitored for what that shooting did to them psychologically?
Sure, thank you. That's a great question. The question was about the officers and how we prepare them going back to work psychologically and just their mental health in general. And so we have what's called a return to duty protocol, and that includes our wellness team gets involved with those officers. They go see a counselor. They can see a chaplain and those kind of things, and make sure that we're not rushing that. We don't set a time frame on that. We don't say you've got this many days to do this and then come back to work. It's all work together with the wellness team and that LPC and determining when those folks are ready to come back to work. We also do some things for these officers, like I said before, they've been gone for so long, they're going to have to go through a lot of training to get up to speed to where we are now. We've got completely different body cam systems and different, less lethal. A lot of things have changed in the 2.5 years since they've been gone, so they'll have to be up to speed on all of that. We'll also run them through some scenarios, probably several scenarios, to make sure that they're comfortable, that nothing that they go through would trigger any issues. We don't want them to have any issues out in the field that could not only impact them, but impact the community as well. And so it's just a very lengthy process that they'll go through, but it involves a lot of, their mental health and how those licensed professional counselors, we rely on them to tell us, when those individuals are ready to come back.
On Friday, in your press release, you talked about equipping officers with more, less lethal means of dealing with those situations than was true back in 2020. Can you talk about what some of those less lethal means are?
Sure. One of the biggest things as far as less lethal that we've implemented that we didn't have previously, well number one, when we signed our contract with Axon, that upgraded all of the tasers that we have. That, again, they're never going to be perfect. No less lethal is, but it increases the odds that through heavy clothing and other things, those tasers will have an effect. So that's one of the things that we did. We also, there's a less lethal device called a 40 millimeter launcher, and it has both impact rounds, impact munitions that you can launch from greater distances than some of the other equipment that we had, like the beanbag shotguns. And it also, various types too, like OC and other things that you can administer with those 40 millimeters. We only had a couple of those out in the field. We only had a few people that were certified in using those. So we ordered 150. I believe we have around 145 of those that are out in the field now. We've got 50 more that are on the way. I think the most significant thing is I directed our training staff to make sure that we have more operators for the less lethal than we have less lethal, because it never fails. We have an officer that is assigned that less lethal device, goes on an extended leave, maybe they have an illness in the family, something. They go on some type of leave, and we don't want that less lethal just sitting by not being used. So they're assigned to the divisions, they're assigned to each sector, and we're working to get more operators or certified operators than we have equipment, so we've always got them out in the field. And that's probably one of the biggest things that we've done to try and, just give us more options before we have to go to a firearm.
Is there a threshold for fitness that the department has? You were talking about caring for the officer. Of course, they're human beings too. Also caring for the community as well, that they're going back to policing. Do you have a fitness threshold there that you look for before you actually assign them back out there, back out on patrol again, maybe public?
Absolutely. I'm not an expert in that at all, and that's why I rely on those professionals that make those assessments and help us do that. We'll rely very heavily on them as this process goes on.
After the announcement, did the department anticipate or deploy for protests in the city?
We did not. We of course monitor to see what's going on, but a lot has changed over the last several years too, not just in Oklahoma City, but around the country. And we're not going to get involved in a protest. I mean, if somebody wanted to get together and have their opinions about what happened, they're entitled to do that. We're not going to have any kind of showing or anything unless it turns into something criminal. And we just don't anticipate that. Most of the time there's a protest in Oklahoma City. They obey the law, they do what they're supposed to do, and they have their voices heard, and we don't get involved. So we didn't do anything aside from just monitoring to see if we needed to have any resources available to us, but we didn't deploy any extra resources or anything like that.
Has the department received any threats since the announcement?
No, nothing credible that I'm aware of.
How has your training changed since these shootings all happened in the last half of 2020? Pretty tight time frame there. How has that changed your training, Rick?
I think probably the biggest thing I've spoken about before, this is something we were looking at, that I started looking at when I first became chief. We sent a group to some other departments around the country, some other major cities, and looked at these reality-based training units. And also we had officers, trainers that attended, it's called Integrating Communication and Tactics. It's the PERF ICAT program. So we put several of our trainers through that. But then again, the biggest thing is we didn't waste any time. Even though we're shorthanded, we knew that we had we needed to get our officers through some more realistic type of training and get them, better trained for dealing with these types of situations. And as you look too, a lot of people want to look and judge an organization and say, well, you were behind and you didn't do this until something happened. But unfortunately, in law enforcement, the nature of our work is oftentimes you don't realize there's something you need to train for until you see it. You can think you're doing the best training in the world, but then you debrief an incident or you find out some way that you can do better. And so going ahead and taking the initiative to create that reality-based training unit, because it did pull some very good, well thought of people on our department that are regarded as expert trainers. We did pull some of those folks off the street and said, your ultimate priority is we're going to train our officers and we're going to put them through realistic situations that we can, give them the feeling of what goes on in a real situation. And we're going to take situations that we've been involved in as an organization, and we're going to put all our officers through that. It's no different than what pilots do. If a incident happens on a plane, then they bring their pilots in and they run them through simulators to help everybody learn how to deal with it. And it's usually something that other pilots haven't dealt with before. So I feel like in our industry, we're ahead of the curve in that because we did initiate that reality-based training unit, and we are running our officers through that. We are running through all our officers that are involved in critical incidents. They're running through that again before they go back to work. And I just think there's a lot of things we did there that were forward-thinking, but also just out of necessity. And the community needs to know, too, that we're preparing for these things. We don't have something happen and look at it and say we can do better and then not work to improve.
What would be your message to those in the community who are maybe concerned about these officers coming back to work?
I think the biggest thing I could say is that this is not going to be a quick process. It's going to be well thought out. We're going to work very closely, again, with professionals that are outside of law enforcement in what they're doing. And then I think, too, part of that, there'll probably be a part of that as well where, we're doing community meetings and things all the time, so we have to be very open about that process in what we're doing and just be as reassuring as we can. I mean, I don't know, in answer to your question, there's really not an answer. I don't know how I can prove to everyone that we're going to be doing what is necessary and what is needed other than to do it and then just be as open about the process as we can.
Thank you, Chief.
All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.